And we are live on YouTube according to Zoom. I just want to make sure we are live on YouTube, just to make sure, because sometimes there are delays.
No problem.
And we are live on YouTube. Great. Excellent. So awesome. we are ready for this. So let me start off this. Welcome everyone on YouTube Live, on Zoom, and people who are going to listen to the show later on. Welcome to today's Raw Live. We have an outstanding guest with us today. I've known him for, I think it's coming up to about 9 years, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
Yep. So just an introduction of who this wonderful individual is. Studying 50 years of customer success and 30 successful growth project later, our guest discovered that many customer leaders are focused on all the wrong areas, hoping their customers will always choose them first. I think I'm falling into this category already. That was him as well at the early part of his leadership and key account manager career, getting the occasional result, but frustrated doing what everyone else was, seeking to achieve different results. For over 10 years in various sales leadership roles, supporting teams as much as 600 people and running multiple companies, he made the mistake, learned the lessons, and got the results in order to find the answers. Now, with all that practical insight and wisdom, he enables customer leaders and key account teams to create recurring revenue, relationship growth, and retention results that can trust with their most important customers. He is passionate about helping organizations break free from customer misconceptions in the marketplace that kill their chances of achieving market-beating customer relationship and revenue result. Let us welcome the outstanding Jermaine Edwards to the show. Thank you so much, Jermaine, for being here today. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Wow, I need to take you on the road with me, Rohit. That's amazing. Thank you for the intro.
My pleasure, and it's always a pleasure working with you. So just as a quick overview for our listeners, in a span of about 1 to 3 minutes, a quick overview of what are you doing now and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so most of my time is now spent working with organizations and leaders, doing much of what you've just mentioned, really, ensuring that really good leaders and good companies don't lose those great customers because of flawed methodologies and poor customer relationship strategies. And I guess the route to getting here is really twofold. One, it's having had some really hard lessons learned in some failed companies early in the entrepreneurship career, but also in my own community and in my own family. I saw people being made redundant across many different industries and fields and companies. And what I recognized were those companies were failing and literally having to let go of good staff because of really poor leadership, but also poor customer management. And I actually asked myself the question, I said, could I be part of that solution that could help organizations not just keep customers, but never have to think about letting go of good people because of these poor strategies?
Okay, so in this current environment we're in, obviously many people are facing a lot of challenges, and it's not just about the current environment. This could happen. I wouldn't talk about the pandemic as a whole, but downfalls can happen in your business anytime. It could be because of market environments. It could be because of beliefs. It could be something happening with the organization. It could be because of some kind of customer relationship, or your product or service is not up to the mark. In your workings with clients and in your experience, what would be the first step someone needs to take to pass through such challenges?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, and it can be complex, but I think in part it's actually we can be quite pragmatic here. So I think the first thing is really to understand what problem are we actually solving for. And oftentimes we can take the first, let's just say, impression of a problem and assume it's one thing when actually it could be something else. Let me give you an example. Let's just say right now that you're having some customers that restrict their ability and say, look, we can't actually do this with you right now. We have to defer our contracts, we defer these particular solutions, whatever those things are that you've been discussing. And immediately you'd think, okay, well, the problem is that COVID has caused pressure on our customers, that now it's put strain on the commercial relationship, and now they're having to defer this with us. Now, that could be one of the problems. But actually, if we look closely, there could be some other things. One is, what kind of agreements do you actually have in place with your current customers that allow you to have greater continuity of service without disruption of market or even kind of environmental challenges? And oftentimes we think about our product as very linear. We're going to go deliver this face-to-face or so forth. And everybody's had to readapt their model to now deliver something virtually. Now, in principle, what I'm saying here is that the real challenge is we didn't have a model for delivering products and services to our customers that allowed us to deliver those things consistently, even when disruption occurs. That could have been the real problem here, because it's clear that the customer clearly wants to buy from you, but in the model you currently have, they don't see the way in which they could do that without increasing costs, or without, really in the case of not seeing the product as something that's necessary or essential for them to drive the kinds of outcomes that they want inside their business. So there are a range of different problems that we can begin to solve for, but if you're not solving for the right problem, you're always going to find yourself in this stagnant loop of frustration, going back to customers, trying to work things out because you haven't quite fully understood what the root problem is.
Okay, so we're talking about, first we need to identify what are the problems which we are solving for our customers. Now, there are a lot of people who are doing business and they're still not aware of what problems they are solving for their customers. How do they actually identify? What would you say are the steps to identifying this, or these are the problems I solve for you, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer?
Yes, I think there are a number of different places here. So if we take a step back, and I'm just going to give a bit of a hard lesson here. So if you're serving your customers right now, you actually have customers, and you're still unaware of the actual problem you solve, the highest yielding problem you solve for them that's highly sought after and valued by them, then we have a problem already.
Yes.
Because now you put yourself in a very vulnerable position to competition, to reputation, and potentially kind of reputational trust if you're unable to articulate that message coherently and consistently across this organization. That's number one. Number two, let's just say that we're in this particular spot and you don't quite understand what the highest yielding benefit is. So there are actually different levels of problems that you can solve. Ones that are more transactional, based on something that just shows up, and it's a problem for the customer to say, hey, you can come in and solve this one thing for us. That's kind of a level one problem. It's sporadic. It's something that just comes up as something becomes known to a customer, and it's not necessarily something that's concurrent. It's something that you can fix right there and then. Then you have kind of a level two problem, which is something that is designed around a department and something that's stretching or challenging them in some way. You might come in and support a department to do that. Then level three problem is something identified by the strategic board of a customer, of a company, that says, look, these are some strategic goals that we have, and here are the problems we're trying to solve as an organization, and we don't see this as something that's going to be solved a year from now, 2 years from now. We actually want to put in programs in place to help us support that. Now, if you're unaware of those three levels of problems, that you're always going to have level one problems, you're going to have departmental problems, and then you're going to have organizational ones that cascade down to other departments. Meaning those other departments are going to have to think through, what are these strategic goals and these challenges that we're trying to solve as an organization mean for us, and how do we go out and solve that meaningfully from our department? Now, the moment you understand those three levels of problems and how those things connect, you can begin to position your products and services in a more meaningful, a much more powerful and compelling way, because they're seeing you now as what I call the CVO, the Chief Value Officer of their business, because you're coming in to do something much more intentional and much more focused around a business issue.
Okay. So, Jermaine, I've known you for a while, and I've seen you in action on how you get this done, because we've worked closely in that. And in your experience, how did you discover for yourself that these are the three, these are the different three levels I solve problems at? What was the painstaking journey you went through, or wonderful journey you went through to find that out?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a painstaking journey, that's for sure. 2014, I was running a company that was really entrenched in two different industries, oil and gas, utilities, kind of offshore. And what we had was actually a growing, very, very profitable business at the time. We had fairly large fixed overheads. We had employees, really kind of some global supplier contracts. And what we found in 2014, we had these constraints in the marketplace where our customers were coming to us and saying, look, we need to kind of renegotiate these contracts. We can't have these contracts here. These suppliers over here, the whole networking environment just wasn't working. And what I found is, going back to this whole idea of what problem are we solving for, is that many of us can be very and too reactive to the things that we're seeing with our customer. The customer comes to us with a problem, and they go, hey, here's the problem. And rather than taking a step back and saying, well, what problem is this customer really solving for, and how can we help them discover or uncover the right kind of problem to solve that eliminates or completely reduces the likelihood of this problem coming back again? And what I ended up doing with the team that were there was that we ended up just reacting and convincing ourselves that responding in this way was the most pragmatic thing to do, because it made us feel better about our behavior and our responsiveness to the customer. And in principle, we thought it would lend itself to the customer, that they'd see we're really proactive and positive. What it ended up being, though, is the camel that kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, in the sense that even doing all of those things, making concessions, cutting contracts, renegotiating supplier agreements with them, those customers completely went away and ended up going in a completely different direction. We had these huge fixed overheads that we couldn't meet. The company ended up having to close, sell off its assets, and it was one of the hardest times of my career so far. And that particular moment, I had to think to myself, because at the time I was actually still working with another organization and running this company. But in my head, I was like, well, I know this stuff. I know how to manage customers. I've been doing this for such a long time. What's going on here? Why doesn't this business work? And it wasn't until a few months later where I actually attended an event, and this was October 2014. A guy named Jay Abraham was actually at this event. It was around other leaders that were trying to figure out, how do we make sense of our business? How do we make our business so attractive that actually it makes it kind of irrefutable that these customers want to stay with us? And we were talking about these big ideas. And a question was asked by the facilitator. He said, do you believe it's possible to become irreplaceable to your most important customers, that they never want to leave, that we can have consistently this ecosystem of value that protects them from the competition, and so forth and so forth? And to be honest, I was skeptical. I was like, no, it's not possible, because I'd just been hurt. I was in a very different mindset. Belief systems weren't quite aligned. So I raised my hand and I challenged this. I said, I don't think it's possible. I think it's irresponsible to think that way. I think some customers are just going to move away and so forth. And in that moment, he challenged that statement. And he said, well, do you believe this is not possible because you haven't done it, or because you actually don't think it's possible? And so I walked away there a little bit upset, frustrated, and thinking to myself, what are you talking about? Of course this doesn't work. But then something in me was just like, well, what would need to be true for you to become that kind of organization with your best customers, that they would want to have that kind of relationship with you. And that began an exploration of about 5 years of studying, researching, doing some stuff for free with some big organizations like Gartner and Dell and GE to figure some of this stuff out. And all of a sudden, I started to notice these particular patterns, which we call predictive power. And these patterns that we saw were just concurrent with these very successful companies that were getting sustainable results. And as soon as we just started to look at that and apply it to some of the businesses I was working with, we just saw just phenomenal results just coming out of that. And it changed the way I thought about some of the other businesses that I was running. And it really significantly improved those results. So it really came from that particular story of this dramatic failure, hundreds of thousands of pounds in debt, moving into this conference, being challenged, my beliefs being challenged, and walking away asking myself what would need to be true for this to be a reality for organizations, for me personally in my organization, for how we run and serve our customers as well.
Okay. So from what I'm getting is, to start off, it's about what's happening with your beliefs, or what people call their mindset or their mind flow, where it's taking you. And if that can be managed, then this is possible in what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this belief thing is huge. It really is. And I think we need to shift from this retention mindset into an irreplaceable mindset. So rather than saying, what do we need to do to keep these customers, is saying, what would we need to do for these customers never to want to leave directly. And that's a very different shift in belief. So going from what do we do to keep them, rather than what do we do or what needs to be put in place that they never want to leave. And that shift in mindset will move you to really asking a different set of questions, to building different kinds of systems in place for your business, so you can have more of that predictive certainty around how you go out and deliver value, and that value that's seen by the customer being so insanely valuable that those customers never want to leave.
So would you say, is it fair enough to ask your customer, your client, how can I be irreplaceable for you? Or what can I do to be irreplaceable for you?
So yes, in principle, we can answer those questions, but most people just don't know. And I'll give you a reason why. Because oftentimes we all have our own blind spots. And if you think in our own businesses, we would think we know our own businesses well. But the moment we get in front of a consultant or somebody who's supporting us and helping us in our business, they may ask us a question that takes us to a different level of thinking that we hadn't necessarily explored in our organization. And all of a sudden we recognize some advantages that we have in our business that we didn't see before, or things that we perhaps took for granted that actually are hugely valuable for us to implement on, to take action on, or things that we just need to get rid of completely. So the goal for us directly as customer leaders is not necessarily to ask the questions that give us the answers, but to ask the questions that give them the answers, so that as we explore things together, we're discovering and uncovering more of what that value looks like together. You're not going to get that necessarily in a single question. So we may need to ask ourselves some different ones. So what is it we know about our customer today that enables us to serve and support and deliver to them at a high level? What is it that we don't know or would need to know about the customer for us to take that value and the way we deliver service to that customer to another level? Equally for them, what do they know about themselves that supports in terms of how they go and deliver to their customers? What is it they don't know? What is it they may need to know in order to do that well? These are some really perhaps simple questions, but actually they're very, very powerful, because the moment you begin to ask yourself, what don't I know about my customers today, that if I did know, it would actually significantly help me to deliver greater value and service to them that would be really irrefutable to them later on, that I should be the number one choice for them at all times. Now, I'm not sure if anybody really asks those questions often or frequently enough, but it's really important to do, because we're always discovering something new about our organizations. No living entity remains the same. And that includes an organization. We're always moving through these shifts of change. And if we're not asking these kinds of questions, we're always going to fall into making assumptions that leads us to having and making some really fatal decisions.
Okay. So you often, I mean, I've spoken to you in the past, and you often say that, people spend a lot of time creating detailed account plans, getting the latest CRM technology, putting, use the best practices, which they've heard from their favorite conferences, but still they're frustrated, still they're stuck, they're struggling, they're worrying, and they're wondering what to do next. What do you say to those people? How do we help those people out?
Yes, I think the first thing here is if something isn't working for you right now, again, going back to the whole idea of just understanding what's the problem we're solving for. And oftentimes people are pursuing popular practice,
yes,
and they're not pursuing predictive power. What I mean by predictive power is being able to deliver something consistently to get a recurring result that even when your organization necessarily isn't necessarily always aligned, you can still get that same result. That's the whole power of a system being in place. And so when you have this kind of idea of predictive power, it ensures that outcomes are not based on everyone's behavior necessarily, but on systems for growth that give you the certainty for value and results for customers. And this is what it is today. Oftentimes we're too heavily reliant on the behavior of individuals in our businesses and not on the systems we produce that help or enable the right kinds of habits to be exercised in our organization to get those results consistently. So if you don't know what the lead behaviors are, the lag results are going to fall away. And so I'd be taking a step back and saying, again, going to this question here, if we want to produce predictive power, being able to deliver consistent recurring results, that even when the behavior isn't there, we can still actually deliver the kind of value and results we want with our customers. What kinds of things would we need to think about? Now, in our methodology, we have these 5 big areas that we tend to say you need to have a think about. That's really important. But before we even get there, we need to make people aware of some of the 5 big pitfalls that most organizations fall into. But it needs to just to evaluate and say, do we do any of these things? And if we do, we need to address these first before we get to the system of these 5 Ps.
Okay. Now, what would be those 5 things which you're talking about?
Yeah, so we find these 5 pitfalls for organizations for losing great customers. So the number one is a lot of organizations, I won't say most, but a lot of organizations mistake customer convenience for commitment. And so what I mean by that is just because a customer buys with you again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're buying for the exact same reasons and they have the same needs going forward. And so oftentimes, let's just say I buy from Asda or from Amazon. I may be buying out of convenience, but not necessarily commitment to the brand. So it may be based on proximity. Yeah. That actually this person's close and therefore it's convenient to me, but I'm not committed to the brand. And so what can happen sometimes is that we can see these purchases happening with customers. They go, oh, wow, they must love us. But actually, is that the real reason for them purchasing? Are they actually committed to your brand, to you as an organization, and committed to making that relationship meaningful to them as a priority moving forward? Oftentimes, we find that's not the case. There are other things at work that are driving the reasons for a customer buying again from you. And so we need to be aware of those things and not fall into the misnomer of thinking that because they're buying, they are actually committed. So that's number one. Number two is most organizations or a lot of organizations don't really have an evaluated or a way to evaluate the effectiveness of their customer management practices and strategies. And so what I mean by this is that oftentimes we'll take on the practices, the best practices in the marketplace, and we don't ask ourselves the question that does this particular practice solve for the root cause that we are trying to eliminate or eradicate completely in our business? And oftentimes we take on these best practices thinking, okay, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're not doing this. And rather than taking a step back and saying, actually, what are we solving for? And does this significantly reduce or eliminate the root cause of what we're trying to solve in our business so we can get this result? I very rarely see that. And oftentimes people have got all these best practices. They've got these loyalty programs. They've got these customer experience charts on the wall. They've got these mantras. And all of a sudden they realize things are falling apart. What's going on? It's because you haven't actually designed for those practices to meet those root causes and designed for the outcome or the ideal outcome you want through those practices. Mm-hmm. So that's the big thing. There's no real evaluation of those practices. Number two. Number three is we fail to adapt to new customer expectations, and we often measure the wrong metrics. So a quick example for this is we often are heavily reliant on customer satisfaction scores. And there's so much I can say on this, but it's a really poor measure for as a leading indicator for sustained customer relationship future casting. For future casting out there, you need a much more holistic measure for that. And oftentimes we all kind of hold tight to, hey, is customer satisfaction going up? If it is, we're happy, and we somehow miss these other metrics that are there. And what I see is that oftentimes we can see this, and I can probably prove this in most organizations, is if customer satisfaction goes up, are you actually seeing revenue, profitability, referability, and all these other metrics go up at the same time? So, because surely, if you're getting high customer satisfaction, you would also be getting these other prerequisites that come with that. If somebody's highly satisfied with you, they'll be buying more frequently with you, buying at a higher level with you, buying better pricing with you, and all these kinds of things. But we actually don't see that happening in the marketplace. The numbers just don't stack up. And so it's not that customer satisfaction is wrong, but it's not a great measure for doing it as the only measure you're using within your business. So that's what I mean by failing to adapt to new customer expectations, is that we're not actually seeing what's really happening with the customer, and we're measuring these other metrics to make us feel better so we can tell the world that we're getting good satisfaction marks when we're actually failing our customers on the other side. So that's number three. Number four, I'll go through this pretty quickly. Number four is we sometimes overestimate the strength and health of our customer relationships. And so what I mean by that is this: inside an organization, you might have 2 or 3 really great relationships, and you're high-fiving those contacts, you're having a good time, but all of a sudden you find one of those contacts leave, and the relationship with the business changes overnight. And you're like, well, what happened? We had a great relationship with this company. No, you didn't. You had a great relationship with a contact. The company doesn't know you at all. And so oftentimes we will overestimate the strength and health of our customer relationships because of the relationship we have with a contact and not necessarily with the business. And this is a really important distinction. And we often get this wrong because we believe, hey, if I have this relationship with this person or this person, surely it's going to mean that the business understands and knows the value that we produce for them. Wrong. No, they don't. If that were the case, then every time a contact leaves, you still maintain the same level of strength, health, and your continuity with a customer. But the reality is we don't. It happens all the time when a key contact leaves. And then we make the excuse that, that other person who's left, they'll take us with us to another company. What happened to the 5 years you just put into this relationship?
Yes.
Why should that? So it's frustrating to me to see, but I see this probably one of the ones that happen the most, this overestimating of strength and health of customer relationships. That's number 4. The last one here is being fooled by what we call RAS moments, or random acts of success.
Okay.
So I'll give you a scenario here that you get a big win with a customer. And everybody in the organization is high-fiving. They're like, wow, this is an amazing result. We've never seen this before in our life. And what happens there is then we begin to forecast based on this specific moment that, hey, we can do this again. But actually, we really haven't understood what got us there. And so what happens is we have this success bias where we believe just because something's happened once, it will happen again, but we actually don't have any root or understanding of why it happened. And so random acts of success, if you're looking at the results you have with customers, but actually they're fluctuating like this, what's possibly happening here is that you have too many random acts of success, moments in time with the customer where you have little understanding of what actually drives highly sought after value predictably with your customers. So if you get one big moment with a customer, and then for another 2 years you flatlined, that's for me, that's a real problem indicator that you haven't fully understood how to do that consistently with the customer based on what's highly valued and is predictably kind of certain for you to drive greater value with customers. So those are the 5 big mistakes: mistaking customer convenience, not evaluating best practices on the practices you have, failing to adapt, overestimating the strength, and falling for rash moments. We see this all the time, and when you have that in your business, you cannot grow as fast as you want.
So when I'm listening to you, to simplify for myself, what I'm hearing is there's from these 5 things, there's 2 aspects which are coming up very clear for me. Is one is that you need to be that customer expert. So I'm not talking about that relationship expert, but the customer, the client expert. And the other side is having those critical conversations with your customers. So looking at these 2 points, let's look at that customer expert. Again, like you said, the 5 critical, the 5 errors which we tend to make, and it's going all to the customer, is how do we become a customer expert? Because there's so much required there. It's just not a relationship. And that's where I think a lot of challenges happen, is the relationship's gone. The relationship only saw me as an expert, not the company, because the company is the customer. So how do we make sure that customer expert is seen by the whole company?
Indeed. So let's talk about that kind of being the expert. So one of these things here is that there are these tiers in which we need to look at. So the first is, once you've decided that this is a customer that we want to really invest in, we'd spend some time thinking about 3 specific areas. One is the people, then we have the business, and then we have the market that they're in. And each of those things have this almost like Venn diagram of impact. And so inside there, you want to be able to, first of all, understand the people. What drives the way in which they do things inside their organization? And what are the relationships, and how do they coordinate and do things inside their own business? What are some of the common thread factors, the common thread goals or values or outcomes that if you went to any part of the business, you get some commonality in which they would say, yep, those things are true for us. That's true for us as well. And begin to understand that better. It's like the kind of psychographics of the business. What kind of drives their motives, behaviors, and attitudes. And then we want to start to think about, from a systems perspective, how is their business actually modeled? How do they actually deliver value to their customers? What does that look like from each department? Do you get lots of strained relationships between the finance systems and the sales and marketing and operations? How does that look like? What are some of the biggest challenges they face in the business in delivering to their customers? What are things they're really proud of? What do they do really well in their business as well when it comes to delivering value to their customers and to the wider marketplace? And then you might go to the marketplace and say, what does this market actually look like? What are some of the big challenges for this market? What kind of the big disruptors? What are the biggest disruptors in that market over the last 5 to 10, maybe even 20 years? And how does this impact, or what kind of impact might it have for this particular customer? And what's coming in this particular marketplace? So for many people a few years ago with GDPR, that was a big disruptor for certain kinds of industries more than it was others. That was something that we needed to think about as organizations were making those adaptations. And even for things like in markets where they're much more vulnerable to environmental disasters. So you think about what's in that marketplace, what might impact, what kind of risks are there, what opportunities are there within that particular market that the business, that client might want to take advantage of, or maybe kind of big risks for them in their business as well. So you want to take that holistic view, and then from that place, ask yourself the question, where would be appropriate for us to begin to serve this customer at a higher level? And it could be that we begin with the relationships that we have and saying, so based on what we know about the people, the business, and the market, what is the most meaningful next step that we can take with this person and their department, and just begin from that particular place. Now, I'm not saying this is going to take, it's going to take some work. And if you're working with a public traded company, you can look at their annual reports. There are ways in which you can really evaluate those fairly quickly and effectively to see what some of the strategic goals are, the big challenges. If you don't, if they're a limited private company, there's still other ways to do that, looking at the kind of the statement of interest and looking at just generally some of the market conditions, who their competitors are, how they communicate on social media, what kinds of things they state in terms of their own values, the way they communicate and promote their own products and services. There are ways for you to understand some of those things better. However, it still comes down to being proactive, deciding to take intentional interest on those things that matter most to the customer, doing the work. And when you do the work the first time, it will become a natural habit for you to do that consistently. But you have to begin the work and do that intentionally.
Okay. And in regards to having those critical conversations with your customer, how do we go about doing that?
Yes, it depends on what it is that you're trying to do with that customer. So I'd say within any relationship that we're trying to build with our customers, there are always going to be these three components. You're going to have trust, you're going to have commitment, and you're going to have expectation. And those three, I guess, intertwining, I guess, qualities are what really shape relationships sustainably over time. So trust, we know, I won't go into too much depth with that, although it is really important. But I want to talk about commitment and expectation. So most people assume that with trust comes this expectation, or a known expectation and known commitments. And that's just not true at all. Trust will vary, and there are different levels of trust. There's a trust I have with my wife that I don't have with a friend. There's trust I have with my brother that I don't have with my mom. There's a trust I have with my dad, and so forth. Trust has different levels based on the relationships that we have, based on the connected responsibilities that we have together. So we can't rely on trust as a mechanism or as a leading guide to knowing that this person and I have the same expectations or the same commitments to the relationship. So the first thing here is to say, okay, do we actually have the same shared expectations? And do we have the shared commitments to the future of the relationship? And this is really important. We definitely do this in marriage. And this is why we take those vows, because we want to know that a person has shared expectations and commitments to the relationship. And we can have trust, but not shared expectations and commitment. And that's why you have clashes in marriages.
Yeah.
Because poorly shared expectations and commitments on each part. And so the same thing happens in our business relationships. Just because we're getting on doesn't mean that in all aspects of how we manage and do the relationship and how we solve problems together, that we're going to have the same expectations and commitments. So I say one of the first things you should be thinking about is, hey, how do we effectively evaluate the relationship that we have with these individuals? One, do we have trust? Do we have the right commitments? And do we have shared expectations? If any of those things are out of line, I can almost guarantee you'll get blocked every single time. You will find blocks. You'll get frustrated. You'll wonder why you turn up to customer sites. You have great conversations with somebody, but they never advocate for you.
Yeah.
Or that you go to somebody and maybe they advocate for you, but actually they never come back to you and communicate this. That's an expectation. So you want to know so you may have a commitment, but actually the expectation is that you want to know about what it is they're doing and speaking about with you, but they don't come back and do that. That's an expectation. So we need to know, what are those expectations? What are the commitments? And do we have trust? Are there clear commitments? And do we have shared expectations? If you don't have those things, you're going to be consistently blocked. Those contacts are going to be frustrated. You're going to be frustrated because you're talking past each other, believing that you believe the same things.
Okay. So if we look at it from those clients, people have clients who they've had good relationships, and looking at the current situation where some clients actually have turned around, look, we don't have the budgets. we can't work. We would love to work with you. How do you continue that trust, commitment, and expectation with those particular customers? Because there's no agreement in place anymore. They are having their challenges, but you still want to be working with them. How do you continue that trust, that commitment, that expectation with those particular clients who can't currently work with you, who don't have the budgets to work with you? Simple. It's very clear. How do you do that?
I think the first thing you need to do is to show that you genuinely care about them. And I think what can happen is the moment we fall into a place where we feel pressure, where we feel this sense of insecurity, where we feel we need something or we would like something from this relationship, that becomes a very toxic place for us to begin a conversation. So if we genuinely feel that way, I'd say take a step back and really ask yourself, why do you exist right now, today, for this customer, for this marketplace? Why is this important that you serve them right now? Why should they do anything with you? Ask yourself those questions. Get really real here and say, what is it we're actually adding to this company? Why do we want to serve them? What is the reason? What is a real genuine thing that we think we can produce for this customer that is just so rich and real and powerful that we must have this conversation with them or continue this conversation? I think most of us aren't asking that question. We're reacting because we need something. We need more assurity from the customer. We need confidence from the customer saying that, we need you guys. We want to work with you. And we feel good about that thing happening. Well, what about the customer? What would need to be true with the customer to know that you still care, even when the relationship can't necessarily continue in the same way? I mean, just think about a relationship that we just have in general with a friend or a wife. Just imagine that they say, hey, you know what, I can't go out with you, this week because I'm really challenged financially. And you go, well, what's that got to do with me? Why don't you just come out anyway? Just come out anyway, and we'll see what happens. It's like, well, no. We would never do that with our friends. We'd never do that with our wives. We'd come alongside them and say, hey, where can we help? Where can we be of service? So I think the first thing here is we need to think that we need to sow seeds for future expectations. Okay. And so I think it's okay for us to have a conversation that sounds like this. Mr. Customer, this is such a difficult time for you. What I'm hearing is these things, and really name those things that you're hearing from the customer. And then what you may go into is a place where we are still being the consultant, but we're doing that in an empathetic way. So something like this is that when you think about the things that we've done together so far, and knowing the results and knowing the things that we really want to still continue delivering for you, what are some ways that we can help you? First and foremost, this is number one, take much greater value from what we've done already. So where can we support you doing that? And we're not asking for a fee. We just want to make sure that you can take advantage of all the things that we've done already at a much higher level so you can get those results at a much better level. And once we've kind of really looked at that, I'd be really interested in understanding some of the criteria that you're applying to making some of the investments moving forward, so we can see if these things that we're doing could align up with that as we continue to serve you and support you and to help at this really difficult time. Would that be something that we could really consider? Okay. Now, all of a sudden, you've shifted the game. You're giving something away. So look, how can we leverage the things that we're actually doing right now, create momentum, support you there? And now I'd really like to understand some of the criteria you may be applying to some of the investments so we can see exactly where this fits. And we don't want to assume that what we're doing is always going to be a value at the same value for the right people at this time. We want to make sure, we want to be 100% sure that when we come back to you, we want to share some new ideas, or we want to share maybe a solution that we think might be of value, that we're coming to you at a point in time where we know what the criteria is, we know what kind of results you want to produce, and we can be really confident that we can help you do that. Is that something you'd be open to exploring? And really taking that particular view, taking it real slow, step by step, but beginning with value first. Where can we leverage that? And then saying, hey, sowing that seed for future expectations. We'd love to have this conversation for these reasons at the right time, but we'd like to continue that conversation up until the point in which we really understand those specific areas that we can deliver the most value for. And at that time, I'm sure you'll agree that that will be the best time for us to make an investment together.
So what I'm hearing from you is it's not about the transaction, it's about the value which you can give your customers. Yeah.
Without a doubt. I mean, going back to this whole idea of becoming the CVO, the Chief Value Officer for the customer, there are really kind of two principles here. Is that one, you get sent to who you sound like. I'll explain that in a moment. And number two is you get access to the level of problem you're trying to solve. So the number one here is you get sent to who you sound like. So the first piece here is oftentimes we're speaking to one person. That person may now not be in a position to make any other decisions. And so what we need to do is we shift our language so that the person recognizes that they may need to send you somewhere else, or that we need to elevate our conversation to a different level in the business. I'll give you a quick example. So let's just imagine that you're speaking with the HR director of the company. You're thinking about particular services that you want to do with them. Now, what you recognize here is that there's something at a much higher level that we need to discuss. And so what I do is that now I have to shift my language as this person. So what I may do is this. I may say, hey, this is called Susie, Bob, whatever it might be. I've noticed something in the business here. And we've been talking about this particular thing. And actually, if I think about what some of the executives, and I say these words, what some of the executives are thinking about in our research, what we found is that these things and these things are going to be super important to them. And I wonder how we can collaborate to think about how we communicate that message to them so they also get that kind of value. Is that something you've explored before? And how would we do that together? So I want to shift the language from just talking about this thing and make the transition to this, talk about someone different at a higher level, and still make it collaborative with the person. So it doesn't feel that we're kind of leaving them behind. But we want to make that transition to, this is what we're talking about right now. That's A. Here's B, a higher level to what we're not talking about. Then we come back to middle ground and says, how do we bridge this gap? We get them to solve it with us. And if they can't solve it with us, then we make some suggestions. And then we get their permission to move forward. And so that's something we might do. So we get sent to who we sound like. So we need to change our language so that the person we're speaking with understands that we need to take this to another level and move to this different stage. That's number one. The second is we get access to the kind of problems, the level of problem we're trying to solve. This goes back to this whole idea of this transition. Now, and there are different levels of problems. Obviously, ones that are just momentary, ones that are departmental, ones that are organizational. So we start thinking about what level of problem are we actually solving for. Now, it could be that we're just solving for a department. And so that's one level of problem. And guess what? There may be some other departments that could get benefit from it. But unless we can connect it to an organizational goal, we're always going to have a restriction to the level of impact that we can have and the level of value we can gain from that relationship. So, but Chief Value Officer understands these principles that at all times in all places, we're probably going to need to stretch the conversation and change the language so that we can move to a higher level. But the other part to that is we can't stay at the same level of problem. We have to find ways to move to making those connections between department and organization, and making that organization connection so strong and powerful that it's not effective for you not to speak to somebody more senior.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I'd say, yeah, those things I think are very powerful traits. That doesn't mean that for all businesses you would need to do this. You can be very comfortable just speaking with departments and solving that problem. You can be very profitable, very successful.
Yep.
I'm talking to those particular companies, leaders that want to get so connected and deep rooted in the organization that they want to begin to get that visibility.
Okay.
The route to doing that is to think about these two principles.
Fair enough. Okay, making sense. As we're coming to the close of the interview, what is one way people can get connected to you so they can learn more from you or use your services or just have a chat? How do they connect with you?
Yes, you can do that via LinkedIn. We'll put some links in the show notes so you can get connected there. But ideally, if you want to speak with my team, you can go to JermaineEdwards.com and you can find out, particularly as a leader, if you want to just get understandings for what can you do pragmatically to help your team win with your customers. How can you help influence what your company is doing? That's a great place to go for that. Jump onto the mailing list. And we're actually going to be launching something called the Customer Coffee Hour. It's completely free, 60 minutes a month with your peers to help solve problems together. So that's going to be a really powerful experience starting 16th of September. That's next week. The second part to this is as an organization, if you're looking to really start to begin to think about transforming the way in which you're interacting with your customers and creating what we call predictive power, then I'd go to the iadvisorygroup.com. That's my other consulting company. Okay. We actually deliver for organizations. And that's where our team could talk to you about how we do that and how we provide what we call the ripple experience. The ability to start with one thing and the impact cascade across your business. We want to be able to do that with you and for you and help you make a meaningful difference with your customers.
Okay. And with all this is happening, I mean, one thing, I mean, this is getting a bit slightly digressing from the topic, but I do believe this is extremely important, is you're a family man. You've got 5 kids. How do you manage all of this and still be that CVO for your customers?
I can't do this without a team. That's for sure. I have a great team that's working with me. They are fantastic, and they provide a lot of respite for me to do what matters most. But part of it, I've been recently. I mean, I'll just pick it up. I've been going back to some of the kind of classics, like Getting Things Done with David Allen, and just thinking about, what kinds of models and frameworks could I re-implement back into my life that would give me much more control over those things that matter most. And so I've been just tweaking and remodeling some of those practices for how best to prioritize. I was rereading just a book recently by Greg McKeown, Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less but better. So I've been thinking about all these different things and how can I get results to my customers faster with actually the least amount of time? How can I get this particular result not in a day, but actually in 2 hours? I've been really thinking about some of these different areas so I can not necessarily reduce my time with customers for that sake, but actually optimize that time so I can actually deliver more value to the customer. If I can move that from a half a day to 2 hours, now I have this other time to think about what else I can do for the customer. So I think there's a great kind of opportunity there for everybody at this time, particularly when you're at home, you have little time to reflect perhaps. You can be thinking about how can I remodel the way I think about my time, the way I think about how I deliver results right now for other people. And could this be done better? Probably, maybe, who knows? That's up to you. But I'd encourage you to start reading some of these books like Essentialism, like Getting Things Done with David Allen, or the One Thing by Gary Keller. Those types of books are just going to open up your perspective again. If you've read them before, read them again, just to kind of challenge your perspective. Okay.
And before we close the interview, very, very crucial and probably the most important question. When are you going to be James Bond in the movies?
Matt, you know what's interesting is my dream car is essentially like a James Bond vehicle.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to be James Bond, it's if I announce I'm going to be James Bond, my friend, then it's the time that I kind of put down my shoes as anything in the customer area, and I become a full-time actor.
But you've got the looks of James Bond, and you need to be James Bond. Let's put it this way.
So
you can manage 5 kids. That is amazing.
I need the Aston Martin, my friend. That's what I'm after first.
Thank you, Jermaine. Really, really appreciate your time. A lot of practical insight, value, and wisdom from you. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much, my friend.
Not a problem at all. My pleasure. You're doing such a great work, man.
Thank you. Thank you, Jermaine. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us and for listening to this later on. Take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Take care. Okay. We have finished.